before I get into why the Acura CL had to get replaced with the Acura NSX, I do want to note that the Acura CL, if you haven't had the opportunity to experience that car, is definitely one that you shouldn't pass on. That Acura CL is both engaging and with its 6-speed manual transmission really makes it a dream for the turns. Limited slip differential, nice power band, and that smooth 6-speed transmission really lends itself to a good experience. So don't pass up on it, and don't think for any reason that that car would eventually have to get replaced for an NSX. If financial opportunity presented itself, I would certainly acquire another Acura CL 6-speed again. But just know that we did release that car and it's going to a good home. So all is not lost there. So let's talk about the Acura NSX here. So like I said, it's a pretty rare car, but as we are starting to find out, digging into the history of this car, this particular one is quite interesting in its history. So the reason why I say that is because Acura NSXs in themselves are pretty significant, right? Well, it takes something special or something to come along in its history to make it stand out from the rest. Like perhaps some sort of racing connection or some sort of rare configuration that otherwise wouldn't have been obtained. But this one right here seemingly is just a rare color car, Brookland green, right? Nothing significant about it. And as we'll talk about this car in depth, the reason why this one is so significant is because this one is what they call a CVA car. And if you're unfamiliar with what CVA is, that's Honda and Acura's internal designation for a company vehicle administration car. And we were able to ascertain that for the first year of this car's life, that it spent its life in the hands of Acura and Honda themselves. So how did we come to figure this all out? Well, we pieced together a couple clues that just really didn't add up in the car vehicle history. One, the new owner of this car, the first owner of this car, didn't take possession until mid-1995, even though that this is a 94 production. And you would say, well, that's not that significant. These cars didn't sell that well back in the day, and maybe this just sat on the lot. Well, the interesting part about this is it didn't actually see its first owner and registered on the road under somebody's title, so a car being titled for the first time, until mid-1995, and it was titled with about 6,900 miles on it. And you would think to yourself, well, how's that even possible? How can a new car, one that didn't sell on the lot, go for sale in 1995 and have 6,900 miles on it? That's a significant amount of miles on it. So we started to dig a little deeper, and through some connections with Acura and Honda, we were able to find out that this car was never delivered to a dealership. And in its internal database, it is designated a CVA car. So like I said, company vehicle administration car. And that means that it was in the hands of Acura and Honda for whatever reason for the first 12 months of its life, and then got sold at auction and then officially titled in mid-95 under its first ownership with 6,900 miles on it. So we were able to definitively determine that it was a CVA car through some connections and calling for those connections to look into the database. So let's take it a step further. Well, what's the significance of that? So you may say to yourself, so what? Well, because of the rare options on this car is heavily optioned. And what I mean by heavily optioned is it has the first year paint color, 1994 Brookland's green. It also has the OEM chrome 7-spoke wheels, which are pretty significant and rare in themselves. But it also came with keyless entry, cell phone or car phone, as well as a 6 CD changer, and had a number of kind of clues around the car that really denoted that it was a somewhat special car. In addition, and I'm going to go ahead out on a limb and say why this car is likely a PR car is because it is an automatic. And you may say, oh, you bought an automatic. But if you've never owned an NSX before, don't pass up on an automatic. And the reason why I say that is because it's still quite fun. This car is a momentum car. So this car with an automatic transmission certainly robs it of some sort of prestige by not having a 6-speed or a 5-speed transmission, but it really points to it was either used for PR purposes because of its rare options, first year color, and likely was used for special events. It could have also been used by a high-level executive, but we tend to believe that it was more used for PR purposes. And the reason why we say that is because we need your help to figure out if there's any photography that was done around 1994 when the Brookland's green car was first rolled out. Likely, we do know that it was delivered to Torrance, California, specifically Acura and Honda's headquarters there. And we're wondering if there's some sort of launch event or some sort of celebration event that would have taken place around mid-94 to late 94 that likely would have put this car on the center stage because of its first year color. Now, that doesn't mean that we know definitively that it was used for PR. It could have simply been used for testing purposes, not as a test mule, but for showing around to dealerships and being able to show the accessories that you could have gotten, for example, like the wheels or the car phone or the 6 CD changer, keyless entry, and so on and so forth. So it could have just been a test subject to go around to the dealers so that people could see how these things functioned, or at least sit in the car and understand how everything connects. So we're really unsure about why Acura and Honda used this particular car and how they used this particular car, but it's a pretty cool historical connection there, which makes it really difficult to do what we were going to do with this car. I think because of how this car is optioned, the fact that this is my dream configuration minus the transmission, we had some high hopes of perhaps doing a manual swap on this car, which would have been certainly cool to put on the channel. However, I'm not quite sure I want to go that way yet because I haven't really understood the full connection here with Honda and Acura and how this car was used. And for that purpose, I just don't see changing the automatic transmission out for a manual quite yet. We might end up there, but more importantly, I think it's condition and its connection to Honda and Acura we want to preserve first and foremost before we go down any path of modifications. Now, there are some things here that need to be addressed, and we've started to go down the checklist. As you would imagine, a 30-year-old car such as this hasn't seen this proper maintenance cycle, although some of the more recent owners have attempted to maintain this car pretty well. It shows beautifully, but there are some things, and we've already started to tackle a few of those. For example, it does need motor mounts, and we've already replaced one. The AC wasn't working. The windshield washer sprayers are clogged up. There's a few things like that where we need to go through and just freshen it up a little bit. We've already done an oil change on this car, and we're going to do a transmission fluid change on this car. We do know that these cars don't really tolerate well to sitting, but instead of hearing me talk about this car, let's go ahead and show you some footage of driving as well as what this car looks like under the sunlight so that you can see everything there is about this NSX.
Alright, so we just picked up the 94 Acura NSX after a flight out to Chicago. What a trip it was. It started off really bumpy, and what I mean by that is that we started to get on the plane. There was a mechanical issue with the plane where we had to deboard the plane, sit in Burlington for a while, and then hop back on. I really didn't think that this trip was going to happen. Generally, you know how those flight delays go, they end up turning into cancellations more often than not. But 2.5 hours after we were supposed to take off, we ended up taking off, landed in Chicago, drove out to the dealership, saw the car. They had it all lined up ready for me. They knew I was coming, obviously, and went out for a test drive, looked at the car, and I was just in love. I could not pass it up. It was such a good deal. This NSX has less than 100,000 miles on it. It is a Brookland's green over ivory interior, I believe, is what this is called. And it's a super rare combination. Not only is the color rare, but it's altogether a one of 16, I believe, Acura NSXs ever produced. It has a beautiful history. It was originally on lease back from the original owner, and then in California, and then it transferred over to Texas, where it stayed there for a majority of its life until it went to North Dakota for a little bit, and then got picked up by this boutique dealership. And they had a hard time moving it, honestly. I don't know why, because it shows well, it's mechanically sorted from what I can see, with the exception of a few things. And it's a wonderful car. I mean, I'm driving right now on the interstate. We've got a long drive back to Vermont with this car, over 14.5 hours all said and done. And it's driving beautifully. I mean, it's smooth. It's got all the power that I believe it should have. And one thing that's really cool is that on this trip, we're going to be rolling 100,000 miles. This car sits at 99,451 miles as of this moment right now that I'm speaking. When we hit 100,000, we're going to pull over and we're going to make a big deal about it, because you don't often hear about NSX owners rolling 100,000 miles. Not this day and age, not 30 years after this car was released. And I get to be that owner that gets to roll that 100,000 miles. Now, are there things wrong with this car? Absolutely. There are things that I will be working on, sorting out, but overall, I don't think it's a bad platform to start with. It doesn't need a restoration necessarily, but it does need a mechanical rehabbing of a few certain items. I mean, the problem childs of these cars is pretty much the issue that we deal with on all cars, all the common issues. And so we're going to be looking at those first. We know that the oil pan gasket, for example, is leaking, even though it was just replaced 6,000 miles ago. They're difficult. Also, we've got cam seal leaks. Not much, but it definitely is leaking, so we'll sort those out too. This car doesn't have any AC, so you can see me starting to perspire a little bit. That's because I'm enjoying my NSX in the summer on a sunny day. Now, it got tinted windows, but I have no AC, so we're going to be driving a majority of this 1,000 miles back to Vermont with the windows open. That ought to be interesting, especially if we hit weather. Yesterday in Chicago, it was a steamy, almost 90 degrees, and no matter what I did, I was perspiring. Now, for modifications on this car, quite interestingly, there isn't a lot of modifications, and if you know anything, that's how I like my cars, is very little modifications, and to the point where it's only got coilovers, which is something I would do anyways, honestly. I don't like 30-year-old suspension. I did that on the CL, I did that on the Legend. I believe in putting modern suspension on older cars to bring them back up to a standard of today. So this sits on BC coilovers, BC Racing coilovers. Not a bad coilover package. I looked it up. It's about $1,000 plus of coilovers, and they seem to be tuned and dampened really well, so we'll probably stick with those. We did put new tires on here. One of the things that I did not like about this car that I saw at the dealership was that it was sitting on a decade-old tire. It was a BF Goodrich G-Force, I believe, which is not a bad tire, but at 10 years old, it's a little sketchy, especially when you're driving 1,000 miles back with something that you just purchased, and this is a forever car for me, honestly, right? So we've got new Falcon RT 660 Pluses on here. Got a great deal on them. I used the dealership's buying power to knock down the price a little bit. Overall, this car shows just fantastic, and now it's going to perform just as well. Cruise control works, radio works, climate control works, except for the AC. Everything on the interior is pretty tight. There's a few little rattles here and there that we'll sort out, but overall, this is an exciting opportunity to have a dream car for me. So let's go ahead and just enjoy some of this 14.5-hour drive from Chicago back to Vermont. And now you know why I sold the CL too. I had to sell a joy of mine to get into a better joy of mine. So hopefully that makes sense. I know a lot of people were like, what are you going to do? Why are you going to let the CL go? It's a beauty. And it was. And it was something that I had to experience. And I hope that other people have the opportunity to experience that car too. But this is something I wanted to experience once in my life, is owning an NSX. I've always been shotgun, never really been driver in these cars. And now, not only do I get to drive it, I get to own it, and I get to be the curator of this car. It's super exciting. So let's get to the road action.
So this is the morning after I bought the NSX, and we're bringing it back to Vermont from Chicago. Staying over in Michigan and staying with some relatives gave me the opportunity to make some changes to this vehicle. Some weird things that I just noticed along the way. One, the dampers were turned up super hard on this car, so I put them in the middle setting. Hopefully that'll give me a little bit better ride today. It was really hard yesterday. Things like the rear view mirror needed to be tightened, small things like that, but got it all figured out this morning. The aftermarket head unit still seems to be a bit of a mystery. Some Pioneer unit sounds really good, but seems interesting how it interfaces with phones.
Alright, we rejoin you somewhere outside of Cleveland, Ohio, sub 10 hour mark for our final destination today. The car is just performing magically. I've checked all the fluids. I've done a kind of a pit stop, if you will, for bio reasons, and then looked over the car pretty thoroughly. And I have to say, besides the rather treacherous roads that we end up traveling, the car is performing rather well. I'm driving with the windows down because of the AC, not having AC, but it's a small price to pay for having this nice of a car, honestly. For the price that I paid, which I'll keep secret, but you can probably find out what I paid through internet searches, this car is a great value, honestly. The rarity of it, but also the mileage, the condition that it's in, some of the amenities like aftermarket coilover setup have really been nice to enjoy once we got them tuned in today. Yesterday was so harsh that my neck was sore. Today, my neck is much better after driving a couple hundred miles at this point. We've got 586, it says on the clock, for our final destination. We're going to be driving through the lower part of New York, about 116 miles from here to Erie, Pennsylvania, where we cut over across the bottom of the state of New York, and then make our way into Vermont. So all is well. I can't really report anything because it is kind of uneventful, but I will say that this car is really smooth. The steering is dead on. It's really nice and tight. If you've ever driven an NSX, you probably know what I'm talking about here. But the seats are fantastic. They are road trip worthy seats for sure. Unlike some of the other cars that I've owned over the years, the Legend probably being the most notable when it comes to uncomfortable seats, in my opinion. I just think that this car is definitely a better road tripper from that perspective, at least. Overall, though, we're sitting at 99652 on the odometer clock. We're about 300 and some change away from crossing that 100,000 mile mark, where we will obviously get out of the car, celebrate it. It might be at dark, but I'm still going to take advantage of it. Let's get back to the road action, as it were, at hand. Alright, so one of the cool things about this NSX is that I get to be the person who rolls 100,000 miles here. So I've got the camera on the odometer, and when I picked this car up, it had 99,000 miles, and I picked it up just 24 hours ago. So we're at 99,999, and you can see the 10th rolling right now. We're about to roll 100,000 miles in this 1994 NSX. Brookland green, one of my favorite colors for this car. Here we go. 100,000 miles. There it is. Bam. All right, so there's a tech stop here in about a mile, so I'm gonna get out, but that's pretty cool. So I just pulled over and it's at 101,000 miles. How cool is that? So we're at the rest stop right now. It was exactly perfect timing for this. 101,000 miles. How cool is that?